Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive. I'm Ross McCorkle, and above me here on the screen is Joe Clark. As always, and a week ago, it was doom and gloom here on the podcast, but the Steelers pulled off the unlikely victory over the Indianapolis Colts, who were the best team in the NFL, at least by record, the best offense, and somehow the Steelers walked away with a 27-20 victory. We're going to dive into how that happened, recapping that game. Then, of course, we will talk about the Steelers' inaction at the trade deadline, at least in the final days. They did make one trade, which we touched on last week. And finally, we will preview their upcoming game in primetime against the Los Angeles Chargers. Kind of another big one, another big prove-it game for the Steelers, so we're going to do all of that. There are no listener questions today, but we would love for some new questions from you guys. 412-254-3145. You can call and leave a voicemail, or you can text us and just tell us your name, where you're from. Leave us a brief question, and we will answer that on next week's episode. And Joe, before we dive in, how are things in your world?
Doing well. How about you?
I'm good. I take it you watched the World Series and all that. Who were you rooting for?
I was pulling for the Blue Jays just because they're kind of a good story. But it was a heck of a series. It was probably one of the best series, probably the best World Series I've seen since I've been alive and started paying attention to baseball. So that was definitely a fun game, a really nice, really fun game seven to cap it all off too.
I saw the viewership numbers for the World Series, and I think it was like 26 million or something like that, which if you look back at baseball's heyday way back, that's like half of what it used to be. So baseball has definitely declined, but I found it interesting because the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Green Bay Packers pulled in, I think, basically 25 million. So it was more or less the exact same amount as Game 7 of the World Series, just showing the dominance of football in today's sports landscape. I found that interesting. But anyway, we will dive into Steelers versus the Colts. That one was at home, and I don't really know where do you want to begin, Joe? I mean, it seemed from the start that things were not going to go well, and then turnover after turnover, and next thing you know, the Steelers were in control.
Yeah, I think the biggest, it kind of had to be the play of the game, even though it came early on, was the TJ Watt strip sack after the drive where the Colts converted the fake punt. They're already up 7-0. Steelers defense has been on the field for a while. If the Colts score there, they can honestly they go up at least two scores, either 10-0 or 14-0 or 13-0, I suppose, if they miss the extra point. But it looked like the game was basically over there. And then TJ Watt comes through and makes a play. And that really seemed to kind of invigorate the rest of the defense. I mean, Peyton Wilson, I've certainly been a little bit harsh on him in the last few weeks. He had a heck of a day. He had the interception, which was a really nice play by him to kind of, because again, that was set up by TJ Watt because Jonathan Taylor had to chip TJ Watt. So Peyton Wilson didn't immediately have to run over to guard Jonathan Taylor. And then the deflection that led to the Sawyer interception, he was just kind of flying all over the field. So really credit to him. But yeah, I think that TJ Watt strip sack was really what started the whole thing. And that was what gave this defense a little bit of life and a little bit of energy. So that was really the key to the game for me.
Yeah, I don't know what $41 million buys you, but it at least bought them potentially kind of the tide-turning play on this one, which led to a very crucial win. I mean, if we're talking about a 4 and what would they have been? Would they have been 4-4? Yeah. So I mean, that would be a completely different conversation if we were talking about that right now. Instead, they're 5-3, still have that lead in the AFC North for now. I thought it was interesting. Derek Harmon was talking about the defense and said that basically I think the exact quote was a lot simpler play calls is what he credited for the team playing fast and aggressive. And he kind of mentioned the team building off of each other. So as you said, that strip sack kind of started it, but Peyton Wilson and a bunch of other plays kind of just snowballed this thing into what it became. I also thought, just looking at Mike Tomlin's strategy, I guess, receiving the ball, he wanted to get up on the Colts because I think he even mentioned it in the Tuesday press conference prior. The Colts have not played with a point deficit barely at all this season, and so his whole goal was to, all right, let's get a lead and see how they play and see if they can, basically claw their way back, as they have not really had to do this year. Sure enough, once the Steelers got that lead, it was kind of, pretty clean game for them. And one of the reasons why is Daniel Jones held onto the ball a little bit longer than other quarterbacks have been against the Steelers. I don't have it pulled up in front of me, but I don't know if you've seen that chart of how fast every quarterback has thrown it on them each week. And it's like 2.4, 2.5, 2. Whatever, like down in that range towards the quicker end of how fast quarterbacks are getting the ball out. And I think Daniel Jones was much closer to like 3 seconds. And so it might not seem like a lot, 2, 0.3, 0.4 extra seconds, but that's the difference between a pressure and a QB hit, and then a QB hit and a sack and a forced fumble. And, of course, that led to 5 turnovers from Daniel Jones. And so I thought that was a significant thing. And I don't know if we're going to see a lot more of that from teams. It's like kind of the proof of concept was there for get the ball out quick, and Daniel Jones strayed away from that, and look what happened. And I don't know if we're going to be seeing a lot more of that this year.
No, definitely not. I mean, if a quarterback can get rid of the ball quickly, I think they're going to do so. I think that's going to be an interesting test this week with the Chargers, because they got a plethora of pass catchers. They got a great quarterback in Justin Herbert, and they got an offensive line that is not very sturdy. So it's going to be an interesting test to see if Herbert's going to be able to get the ball out quickly. But yeah, I mean, after a game where the defense alone forces 5 turnovers, 6 total turnovers forced, I don't think any quarterback is going to want to stand in the pocket with the football against this pass rush.
Getting back to the Colts game, and we'll definitely talk about all of that a lot more when we discuss the Chargers, but Alex Highsmith ended up winning Defensive Player of the Week. I actually thought there was probably a strong case for Peyton Wilson to win that, given that he had 14 tackles, 2 passes defensed, an interception. He knocked that other ball into Jack Sawyer's hands for the other interception. He was all over the place. Probably the best game of his career, but Alex Highsmith certainly had a nice game of his own. 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, a pass defensed. His pass defense was his pass deflection was really impressive for an outside linebacker. He kind of had to dive to knock that thing down, and very impressive play by him. I think we've seen it in the past. He's intercepted some balls before, and so not overly surprising, but still to see a guy of that size make that play, it was impressive. So I don't think this is the first. He's won AFC Defensive Player of the Week at least one other time, I think, but still notable there. The other one, Kyle Duggar, who his first practice with the team was on Thursday last week. So he had Thursday's practice, Friday's practice, Saturday's walkthrough, and then he played, what was it, 77 of 78 snaps. He basically played the entire game. You can expect that to get better, I would think. And I mean, it wasn't like he made a bunch of plays. He only had 4 tackles, no pass breakups. It wasn't like a spectacular game for him, but the fact that you didn't notice him, I think speaks volumes.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I know ahead of the game there's some speculation about how much he would play, but I mean, the Steelers are so decimated at safety. It was kind of a necessity for Duggar to play. And the fact that he played as much as he did and, didn't stand out in a bad way really at all. I mean, he was well deserving of the game ball he got after the game. That's an impressive performance out of him. And, it leads you to think maybe that once he gets more of a grip on this defense, he can maybe become, a good, solid replacement for Deshaun Elliott in the back end, and maybe somebody that can kind of solidify this defense.
Along those same lines, Jalen Ramsey played full-time at free safety. He had been bouncing around free safety slot, wide corner, basically wherever they needed him to over the first portion of the season. Now they have him at full-time free safety, at least for Week 9, and Tomlin confirmed Week 10, this upcoming game as well. But I thought he was very good. I mean, I think we had kind of talked about it, but his days of being a number 1 shutdown type of corner, shadowing guys like Jamar Chase, probably are behind him at this point in his 30s. But moving to free safety, he's able to kind of play with his head a little bit more instead of just pure athleticism and expected to cover these guys man to man. He's able to read things, use his experience, and come downhill. He certainly made a couple of big hits, which I think receivers watching the tape will take note of that for this, any upcoming game where he's basically patrolling the middle of the field. And at least for the time being, I think Pittsburgh should do whatever it takes to keep him at free safety, hopefully permanently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Mike Tomlin said that he's going to work exclusively at safety. Terrell Austin pushed back on that a little bit in his press conference today. But I mean, obviously, Tomlin has the ultimate say there. And I think it makes sense. I mean, he played well. The Steelers like Brendan Eccles a lot and what he can do. I do think you do have a little bit of a question mark with Darius Slay on the other outside corner. But I mean, credit to Joey Porter Jr. He had the one penalty early, but he had the interception. He almost had like three interceptions. There's two that seemed like he could have had before he finally pulled one down late in the fourth quarter. So, I mean, you got to be encouraged with his performance. I was encouraged with how Eccles looked. So I think, Slay might be a little bit of a question mark there, but I am very happy with how Ramsey looked at safety, and I think keeping him there full time kind of is going to be what's best for this defense.
Yeah, and I think the reason why they wouldn't commit to, I think they want to keep Ramsey there full time. It's just they can't commit to that because what's going on at the cornerback depth chart right now, which is I think the Steelers haven't really made any changes on the depth chart all season. They basically just update for injuries. They're not shuffling people around. Anyone they've added to the roster just gets tacked to the back of the depth chart, even if they're playing, more than that would their position on the depth chart would suggest. But this week they actually changed things up pretty significantly. Duggar is now starting strong safety, which bumped. Actually, no, Chuck Clark remains the backup there because Duggar basically just replaced Deshaun Elliott. And Jalen Ramsey slotted into that free safety role. He used to be the starting nickel corner on the depth chart. He was playing a little bit of everything, but he was listed as a starting nickel, which has now bumped Brandon Eccles up into the starting nickel spot. But Brandon Eccles is also the top backup at both outside corner spots. And so you do the math there. You got one player to be the primary backup at three positions, and that's why you can't commit to Jalen Ramsey being a full-time or a permanent free safety moving forward, because they are one cornerback injury away from, what are you going to do there? And especially if that guy is Brandon Eccles, I mean, you really are going to have Ramsey go back into more of a fill-in role where he's playing a little bit of slot, a little bit of outside corner, etc. Because we all know Darius Slay is going down for about 6-7 snaps a game.
I mean, I am so sick of seeing Darius Slay out on the field flopping around and then gets up and comes back in like 5 plays later. He did actually. I think he a more serious injury this week than he's had in the past with his hand. But yeah, I mean, literally every single week it's like, oh, Darius Slay's injured, and then a series later, Darius Slay's back out there. You know why Darius Slay's back out there? Because you see him get cooked by some corner or by some receiver that should not be running past him. But anyway, that's my Darius Slay rant of the day. I'm not the biggest fan of what he's done for the Steelers this season.
I have a good friend who's an Eagles fan, and he was laughing when I was describing this phenomenon of Slay going out every game. He said same thing in Philadelphia, so this is not a new thing with Slay. This is kind of a continuation of the last couple years here. This is a little inside baseball, but Joe is in charge of writing up our in-game injury posts for SteelersDepot.com. And, usually you can't really prepare for these things because they happen so suddenly. And sometimes poor Joe's juggling 3 or 4 injuries at a time. And it always seems to be like Slay's in the middle of when he's juggling like 3 injuries all at once. And so Joe's actually has done some homework ahead of time and has a Darius Slay injured post ready to go for next game. I think history indicates he'll probably need to use that. Of course, now that you did that extra work, maybe he won't go out. But
this will be the one week that he stays healthy for the entirety of the game.
Yes, I mean, hopefully so, because Corey Trice, we haven't talked about that yet on this podcast, but Corey Trice is in his 21-day window to come back from IR. He told the media that he's been ready to come back for quite a while. He also told them he thinks he could be one of the best corners in the league. And, in his very limited time playing for the Steelers, yeah, there was a ton of promise with Trice, but unfortunately, last week he popped up on the injury report with a knee injury, a previously unlisted, so that means a new knee injury. And we'll get to this with the injury report later, but I don't believe he practiced on Wednesday this week for the Steelers. And so that knee injury is now a little concerning. It might be, Omar Khan mentioned that his availability has been something they need to watch. And at this point, it might be the end of the road for Trice. If he's not able to make it back in that 21-day window, he's shut down for the year. And then I think it's time you just have to move on. And I don't really know who's going to give him another chance at that point, unfortunately. So that kind of plays more into the secondary depth chart thing. There just really isn't a backup. I did want to talk about Asante Samuel Jr. because this is a guy who is a free agent right now. He really played pretty well over the first 3+ seasons of his career. Unfortunately, at the beginning of 2024, he ended up a spine injury. So I think he ended up having a surgery, a spinal fusion with like some shoulder damage as well that they had to repair. But that surgery was actually done by one of the Steelers' neurosurgeons or something like that. So there's some kind of connection there. Obviously, I don't know about HIPAA and how much these doctors are allowed to directly share with players that aren't signed to the team and stuff like that. But at least notable that he had surgery from the Steelers doctor. He is actually scheduled to meet with Pittsburgh, so that is a notable thing as well. Anything else with the Colts game here before we wrap up and go to the trade deadline stuff?
No, nothing really. I mean, I think that was definitely the type of win this team needed. I do think, we'll get into it more, but I think they need to build off it and actually show some consistency because we saw them force a ton of turnovers against the Patriots earlier this season. Then they played well against the Vikings, and then, things got worse later in the season. So I think consistency is going to be key, but that was definitely a much needed win to keep this team afloat.
We talked about the defense a lot, so I just wanted to just quickly go through some of this. I thought it was notable. Darnell Washington was targeted, quite a few times. The first half, not so great. I think there was like a time where he didn't get his head around in time, and he kind of, I don't want to say dropped, but a guy his size should probably be catching that combat catch in the end zone. But he did have a corner kind of draped all over him there, so you give him some grace. But not a great first half for Darnell Washington. They went back to him in the second half, and Aaron Rodgers kind of talked about how important it was to go back to him. And I think tight end coach Alfredo Roberts, thanked Rodgers for going back to him. And Rodgers basically said, we're a better team when that guy's on the field. So don't expect, a couple of bad plays to diminish his role at all. He's a guy who is a big part of the plans moving forward. Roman Wilson, he really could have cost the Steelers if it was any kind of a close game. He caught a ball and did his best George Pickens impression of just randomly jumping for no apparent reason. And in midair, he had the ball punched out. That was not a good look for him. A guy who really is just needed to consistently put together good looks to increase his role. It sounds like that probably won't ding him in terms of his usage. Mike Tomlin said he's not holding it against him. He did call it a boneheaded play. And I think Aaron Rodgers, kind of vouched for Roman Wilson. I think even Arthur Smith today vouched for him as well and talked about his increasing role as time goes on. I think Arthur Smith said he's trying to work out that unnecessary jump trait that he seems to have inherited from George Pickens. But I don't know what else on offense. Jaylen Warren, 2 rushing touchdowns on a day where he didn't really play all that well, or he didn't really have room to run. 16 carries, 31 yards, but had those 2 touchdowns. Notable because he hasn't scored touchdowns since, what was it, early last year? Or
It's like a week of last year or something like that.
Quite a while. A big drought for a guy like him who touches the ball a lot. So to sum up this, I guess, last week, what would you say on a scale of 1 to 10 your confidence level was in this team after that Packers game?
I think a 3, honestly. 3 or a 4.
Yeah, I think I'm probably right around there. Maybe I was pretty down bad last week. I was maybe in the 2 to 3 range. But after the Colts game, are we buying it, or is this just classic Steelers where they play bad against good, or they play bad against bad teams and they play good against good teams? I mean, how much has that number moved in your head?
Probably like a 6, 6.5, because I just need to see that consistency out of them. I mean, they have a good opportunity this week against the Chargers, but I just need to see them, really build upon what they did against the Colts to start to feel a little bit comfortable.
Yeah, I think I'm in that range as well. I think the Chargers game is a prove it, if you will, and if they can do another if the defense looks good here, hey, I might be back into the, kind of 7.5, 8, kind of like, all right, this is a team that might be able to win a playoff game type of mentality, which is crazy considering, I mean, if you go back and listen to us talk about this team a week ago, not pretty. And I think a lot of people were like that. So Steelers always find a way to keep things interesting. We're going to talk about the inaction at the trade deadline next. Of course, the Steelers did trade for Kyle Duggar. That was a late round pick swap. That was the week prior to the deadline, but actually at the deadline where the Steelers were reportedly one of the teams making, quote, aggressive pushes to, I guess, get a receiver was the leading report. They did not get anybody, and, I think a lot of people are somewhat disappointed, if you will, but was this to be expected?
Yeah, I think so. I am not one of those people that's disappointed they did not add a receiver. I mean, a lot of the criticism I've seen stems from well, what if DK Metcalf gets hurt? I mean, it's a what if. You added Marquez Valdez-Scantling. You're not going to add another, mid-tier receiver, I guess, to put it like you to give up a, fifth or sixth round pick. I know that, I mean, they were in on Jacoby Myers. That would have been somebody I would have been okay with them acquiring for a receiver. But other than that, I mean, you just shoot for the stars. So, the reports that they're in on some of the guys that didn't move. I mean, that's like a Jalen Waddle, maybe a Chris Olave, a receiver that I think really could make a tangible impact. So I'm okay. I'm happy that maybe they're making an effort to acquire those guys, but I don't really think receiver was this team's biggest need, especially given how much they use the tight ends. I mean, they won last week, and Metcalf had 2 catches for 4 yards, so that kind of answers. Even if Metcalf gets hurt, then they still show that without him being a big, playing a big role, they can beat a team like the Colts. So, there's other needs that maybe they could have addressed, but I am not upset about the inaction in terms of adding a receiver and having to give up draft capital to get one.
Yeah, I want to say DK Metcalf's like 51st or 50th in the league in targets this year. And I mean, typically you're talking about number one receivers getting 7 or 8 per game, and you kind of your high end number ones, which they're paying him to be, I guess, are getting more like 8, 9, 10 targets a game. I think DK Metcalf's averaging like 4 or something like that right now. And like you said, a very quiet game against the Colts. And Metcalf talked about that. He wasn't really too worried about the lack of targets. He just said he wants to win. And I think, honestly, his play backs that up. He had that, I think it was like 2 minutes left in the game. He had that crazy block where he drove the guy 20 yards out of bounds. Yeah, I think he proved that he's here to win, and he's not checking out of games because he's not getting his share of targets or whatever. So that's a positive. But yeah, I agree. Overall, I mean, if we look at Jacoby Myers and what the Jaguars gave up to get him, what was it? It was a 4th and a 6th. I think Rashid Shaheed was a 4th and a 5th to the Seahawks there. So I don't know. Would you have taken either of those deals knowing you can't just sit here and say that the Steelers could have, what if the Steelers gave up that? Because, frankly, if I'm Rashid Shaheed, I probably would rather go to the Seahawks right now, given how well that offense is playing and how well that team's playing. And, you can make the argument that maybe they could have lured Jacoby Myers, but you really never know. It could just be a thing where, like, he's got a cousin in Jacksonville that he really wanted to, go play next to or whatever. I think we saw that with, who was that center a couple years ago? He had, like, some cousin at the beach there in Jacksonville, and he chose Jacksonville over Pittsburgh because of that.
Is it Mitch Morse?
Yeah, exactly. So You just never know. You can't just say, like, the Steelers could have given up that exact same thing to get the player, but assuming they could have, would you have taken either of those deals?
Probably not, honestly. I mean, giving up 2 picks for either of them. I mean, Myers, you could talk me into doing Myers for just a 4th. I mean, a 6th-round pick is, it's a 6th-round pick, but given, how the Steelers have hoarded their draft capital, I don't really know that there's really a necessity to give up, 2 picks for a guy like Myers just because of how they use their receivers. Like now, if I'm Jacksonville, if the Steelers had an offense the way the Jaguars run their offense, then yeah, I'd do that trade. Same with Seattle for Shaheed. But I mean, Shaheed's a great speed guy. He's a great, post route runner. They do a lot of things really well, but it's nothing that the Steelers really utilize. So giving up 2, early day three picks is just not a move I would have made if I was in their shoes. So I'm glad they didn't, match that. I mean, I think both of those guys are going to thrive in, Jacksonville and Seattle respectively, especially Shaheed with the way Sam Darnold's been looking. But I'm glad that they're not in Pittsburgh for that price.
Yeah, I mean, look, the reason we have Darius Slay on the roster is because they could sign him as a non-compensatory free agent, and that was to protect their, projected comp picks that they're going to receive, which is, looks like 4 picks, and they're going to kind of get maximum value return on those comp picks, and so their whole strategy, while yes, they did kind of show that they're willing to be aggressive and go kind of not all in, but make a good effort around a guy like Aaron Rodgers. They did the Ramsey and Jonnu Smith trade. They obviously traded for DK Metcalf and paid him a ton of money. And so they did some aggressive moves, but at the same time, none of it really cost them in terms of 2026 capital. And they've now proven that they're all in for 2026. I think that's the big story. And to a certain extent, I mean, yeah, you could argue the fact that they were after a receiver does maybe indicate that they wanted an upgrade, but the fact that they didn't do any of these deals for maybe these lesser kind of mid-tier guys, if you will, maybe expresses some confidence in guys like Calvin Austin III. It's like you're not going to bring in a Rashid Shaheed when you have Calvin Austin III. Why give up that draft capital, especially a guy whose contract is expiring after this year? That's just something that wasn't talked about enough. Both Shaheed and Myers had expiring contracts, and the Steelers don't do deals in the middle of season. So you're giving up all this draft capital to then have to turn around and negotiate with these guys, and you don't even know who's throwing them the ball next year because Rodgers might retire and all that. So I think, in my opinion, it was Jalen Waddle or maybe Calvin Ridley or bust in my mind. And it sounds like they were in on some of those guys. I think Mark Cabali said that Omar Khan was after some of these guys who didn't move, and he was working his butt off to make the trade, but the price was too high. I think Jeremy Fowler said that Waddle is a guy that the Steelers were considering, but they were dissuaded by his high price tag. And so, I think that, just reading between the lines, I think the Steelers were on the same page there. If we can get a home run kind of player, great. If not, we like what we have. And so I think that is where they ended up. Honestly, for some of the reasons we talked about earlier, I would have preferred them to find a corner, although there weren't very many corners on the move other than, Sauce Gardner and I don't know were there any others? I don't really think there were. So, yeah, it's not super easy to find a corner, I understand. But that's the route I would have gone if I was wearing my GM hat. For sure, and we already talked about Asante Samuel. Anything else to talk about with the trade deadline here?
No, I think that covers everything.
All right, well, we will move on to previewing the upcoming Chargers game that is on Sunday Night Football. That's in Los Angeles, right? This is their longest
Yes.
road trip of the year, which the Steelers have a tough time playing on the West Coast a lot of the time, so that's something to note. But the Chargers are also in a pretty bad shape in terms of their offense, in terms of injury luck. They had a big tackle injury this week. Joe, do you want to go through the injury reports to start this off here?
Yeah, so the Chargers' biggest loss, as we've written about, is Joe Alt. He suffered second high ankle sprain. This one needed surgery to repair, which will knock him out for the season. And that's after the Chargers lost Rashawn Slater in training camp. So, they went from having what looked to be a really, really good offensive line to now having an offensive line that is put together by duct tape. Bobby Hart was signed to kind of mitigate some of their losses. He got hurt last week. He's got a knee and also an ankle injury. He didn't practice yesterday. I would be very, very surprised if he suited up. Mekhi Becton's kind of been banged up all year. He was limited with a knee injury. The Chargers did trade for Trevor Penning at the deadline, but their offensive line is looking like a mess right now. You're looking at either Austin Deculus or Jamari Sailor starting at left tackle. You could go Penning at left guard or right tackle, but they have to trade Pipkins at right tackle. Bradley Bozeman struggled at center this year, and then you're hoping Becton can be healthy and can play right guard. Otherwise, you're basically starting 4 to 5 backups, and Bozeman has not been a starting caliber center this year. So I know after what we saw the Steelers do against the Colts last week, and the Colts have a very good offensive line, and they made Bernard Raymond and TJ Watt really did a good job against Braden Smith, and Raymond looked bad. So a big opportunity for this pass rush to get home against Justin Herbert. Um, you had Khalil Mack return recently, but he was still a DNP yesterday due to rest. Keenan Allen was also a DNP due to rest. And then Tarheeb still the cornerback. He's been out the last few weeks. He's one of their better corners. So him not playing, if he doesn't play, would definitely be a big loss for the Chargers.
Yeah, and we mentioned it earlier, but the fact that the Chargers don't have a good offensive line means they're probably going to be getting rid of the ball pretty quickly, and that's kind of been the Steelers' kryptonite, if you will. But that was before they had, moved Jalen Ramsey to safety and kind of committed to Joey Porter being the top corner, and now there's, Kyle Duggar in the equation. So perhaps things will look a bit different, but that is something to watch for sure. And, Justin Herbert, a guy last year who the Steelers kind of got lucky when they played him because he was all kinds of banged up. I think what was it, a hip or he had some kind of...
I think it was an ankle. And he left the game early, too, when Taylor Heineke came in. And I think Nick Herbig got the best of him a couple of times.
Yeah, and so Herbert, I think at the beginning of that game, if I remember correctly, was looking pretty good until the injury kind of flared up. I think he had the injury coming into the week, and then the Steelers kind of re-aggravated it, and he exited that game, if I'm remembering correctly. And so, Herbert at full strength, regardless of the offensive line in front of him, is a concern. That guy can move. He can escape the pocket. He can run. He can throw. He's the full package at quarterback there. And even with some, both their top running backs injured, non-IR, the offensive line's all kinds of banged up. Even with that, the Chargers have been scoring a lot. I think they're averaging like 29 points a game or something like that, near the top of the league. And so that's very impressive for them. What's their record? Are they 6-3 right now?
I believe so. Yeah, they're 6-3.
So this is like we said earlier, this is kind of a prove it game for the Steelers. All right, you beat the Colts. Let's go ahead and prove it against the Chargers. So, gosh, I mean, Kamani Vidal at running back, you thought they'd have a 1-2 punch of Najee Harris and Amarian Hampton, and Vidal's, played pretty well. And I think Lab McConkey, last year when they saw Lab McConkey, I think it was like his second or third game in the league at the time. And so he's ascended a lot since then. That's somebody they got to worry about. Quentin Johnston, yeah, he had a lot of drop issues in his career, but he's kind of had a pretty nice start to the season this year, at least the first several weeks. So they have a lot of weapons. They have some good tight ends as well, and a lot to worry about for the Steelers.
Yeah, the tight end is really what I'm curious about after how they shut down Tyler Warren last week, but they struggled against Tyler Kraft 2 weeks ago. Rondé Gadsden has had 68 or more yards in his last 4 games, and he has not had less than 5 receptions in that span. He had 7 for 164 and a touchdown against the Colts, but other than that, he's had 68 yards, 77 yards, and 68 yards. So he is somebody that the Steelers definitely are going to have to pay attention to.
And their defense is no joke either. They've got, of course, Derwin James is the probably biggest name, but they've is Bud Dupree still on that defense as well?
They still got Bud Dupree. They got Denzel Perryman and Diane Henley on off-ball linebacker. Linebacker core with Mack, those two, and Dupree is pretty solid.
Yeah, and young corner Cam Hart, he's a guy I liked in the draft last year. Long corner. He's somebody, I don't know who exactly is going to be matching up with who, but they also have, is Dante Jackson over there on the Chargers?
They do have Dante Jackson. You can get a Dante Jackson revenge game. We should make a side bet. Who gets hurt first and comes back? It's between Darius Slay and Dante Jackson, because Dante Jackson did it all the time last year. So that'll be a fun little bet. It might be whoever plays defense first.
I'll go ahead and take. That is a tough one. I'll take Darius Slay. Will go out first. I think.
I think that's a safe bet. I like that.
But Cam Hart's a guy who can. He may end up matching up against DK Metcalf just because of the size thing there. I wouldn't think you'd put Dante Jackson on a guy like Metcalf. So that's an interesting matchup. I think Metcalf is kind of got the edge there, but they do have some strong safety play. I'm sure they'll have help over the top and all that. So, yeah, I mean, this matchup to me is going to come down to whether or not Pittsburgh's defense can, keep up the momentum. Are they able to stop the run? Or, we've seen in the past that against all odds, the Bengals were able to have a breakout rushing game against them. And so when I look at the offensive line of the Chargers, I say, well, they shouldn't be able to run, but this defense has kind of done the unexpected in the past. So shut down the run. They're going to have to keep a lid on Justin Herbert, keep him in the pocket as much as possible. That's going to be a challenge. It's a different kind of... Daniel Jones is athletic, but it's a different kind of challenge with Herbert, a guy who can get going a lot quicker than Jones. Jones is a guy who can build up to high speeds, but not necessarily a quick quarterback, if you will. So a big challenge for the Steelers. Any other matchups that you wanted to highlight here before we give our score predictions?
I really just want to see how the Steelers attack this Chargers offense line, because I feel like every time we talk about, a team that's banged up due to injury, has a clear weakness, the Steelers have kind of struggled to take advantage of it. So I'm really intrigued to kind of see how their front seven goes up against this offensive line.
I agree. All right, well, let's give our score predictions here. Joe, if you want to go first.
I'll go Steelers 24, Chargers 17.
Let's see. Last year I think it was 20-10, but we're talking about Herbert injured, and that one I think was in Pittsburgh there, and this one's West Coast. That does worry me. Mike Tomlin teams. I always want to say that these like little stats about playing at home after the bye or playing on whatever night football don't matter, because it's just kind of some weird stat to talk about, but it seems like they've mattered a lot this year. A lot of the times that we're talking about that stuff, they end up mattering in a big way. And so, the whole West Coast thing does worry me a little bit. However, I do think the Steelers will ultimately win. Maybe we're talking about a closer game, something like a 24-20 Pittsburgh winning. All right, well, that is all for today's show. Like I said at the beginning, we don't have any viewer questions this week, but 412-254-3145. You can call, leave a voicemail, leave a text, say your name and where you're from, give us a brief question, and we will answer that on a future episode. I'm Ross, that is Joe, and we will catch you guys next time.